The dark secrets of the sinful nuns. During the Middle Ages, some nuns lived isolated from the world, but not always isolated from sins. Historical records reveal cases of monasteries where oaths of chastity, poverty, and obedience were deliberately broken, and sometimes shockingly. Poisoning, secret relationships, corruption, and even deals with the devil are among the accounts preserved for centuries in church archives. In this video, you will know true episodes that contradict the traditional image of female holiness in convents. They are not urban legends. They are reports recorded by inquisitors, chroniclers, and in some cases by the nuns themselves. Next, you will understand why some of these convents ended up being seen of such serious scandals that the Vatican had to intervene directly. A. Forbidden pleasures. Sexuality within the walls. Despite the vows of chastity, sexuality was a living and hidden theme within many convents. Nuns were young women, often confined against their will, deprived of contact with the outside world, and subjected to rigid routines. This scenario, far from erasing the desires, often amplified them. Inquisitorial records and preserved letters reveal stories of loving relationships between nuns, secret meetings with priests, and even sexual practices with objects considered sacred, such as crucifixes. A documented example is a convent of Palma de Mallorca, where in the 16th century an ecclesiastical inspection found evidence of collective sexual practices and liturgical profanations, always officially denied but recorded in the church's internal archives. In addition to the relationships between the religious themselves, there are also cases of abuse. In some convents, confessors and superiors sexually exploited nuns under the pretext of tests of obedience or spiritual purification. Complaints were hushed, and many victims ended up silenced under threat of excommunication. This aspect of conventual life, rarely discussed, reveals how the control of the female body, in the name of faith, produced profound and often traumatic effects. Behind the facade of purity, there was tension, repression, and in many cases invisible suffering. 2. Convents as refuge for unwanted daughters, and the conflicts that it generated. For centuries, many young women were forced into convents not out of vocation, but out of family convenience. For noble or wealthy families, sending a daughter to the cloister was a way to avoid expensive dowries in arranged marriages or to get rid of troublesome daughters. But what happened when these young women, forcibly locked, decided to react? There are records of convents where internal life was marked by constant tension, power disputes, envy, silent resistance, and even rebellions. In some cases, nuns wrote secret letters asking relatives or lovers for help. In others, they organized night escapes with the help of servants or priests. A notable example happened in 17th century Spain, when nuns from the convent of Santa Clara were accused of maintaining close relations with local soldiers and merchants. They used secret passages and disguises to go out at night, something that was only discovered after an anonymous tip. The forced confinement generated not only rebellion, but also despair. In some monasteries, there are reports of self-mutilation, psychotic outbreaks, and even suicides. These episodes, usually hidden by the church, show a dark side of conventual life, where silence was not always synonymous with peace. 3. When the convent became a center of power and corruption, convents were not only spaces of spiritual seclusion. In many cases, they functioned as true institutions of power, with political, economic, and social influence. Some abbesses controlled vast estates, had legal autonomy, and maintained direct links with nobles and cardinals. This power, far from always being used virtuously, was also fertile ground for corruption and abuses. In 15th century Germany, the Quedlinburg convent was run by women of noble lineage who acted as rulers of the city. The abbess, with status equivalent to that of prince, could collect taxes, judge cases, and negotiate directly with the emperor. There are reports of favors, misappropriation of resources, and even conspiracies involving political alliances and murders. In other cases, convents sold false indulgences, adulterated reliquaries, and accepted large sums of money in exchange for personalized prayers, practices that cast doubt on the spirituality of the institution. Some abbesses enriched, accumulating goods and living in conditions very different from the sisters who swore poverty. The idea that all nuns lived in humility and sacrifice is therefore a partial construction. Where there was structure, influence, and money, there was also a dispute of interests, and the convents, despite their cloistered appearance, were deeply connected to the power games of the outside world. 4. Mystics or manipulators. When vision served self-interest. Not every nun involved in scandals acted in the shadows. Some used their own spiritual status as a weapon. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, It was common for certain religious to gain notoriety through supposed divine visions, messages from saints, apocalyptic revelations, or mystical experiences. But in several cases, these demonstrations served to influence political decisions, protect local interests, or even mask personal ambitions. One of the most emblematic examples is that of Benedetta Carlini, an Italian abbess from the 17th century. She claimed to have visions of Jesus Christ and experienced religious ecstasies before the community. With this, he won respect and authority within the convent of Pescia. However, investigations revealed that many of her experiences were staged and that she had a sexual relationship with novice. The scandal shook the region and raised questions about the authenticity of mystical experiences in controlled and hierarchical environments. The use of visions as a manipulation tool was not exclusive to Benedetta. Some nuns managed to avoid punishment, promote relatives, or attract donations to the monastery by exploiting the popular belief in holiness. The boundary between faith and fraud in this context was tenuous, and often the authorities of the church themselves preferred to silence these cases to avoid discrediting religious institutions. 5. The convent of Sant'Ambrogio, a case of murder and heresy. In 1858, a scandal rocked Rome from within a Carmelite convent, the convent of Sant'Ambrogio. The case only came to light because a German aristocrat, Baroness Maria Louisa von Linden, decided to become a nun in that place and, shortly afterwards, fell mysteriously ill. She suspected poisoning and managed to report the incident to the Inquisition. The investigation revealed a web of secret practices led by a charismatic nun named Maria Louisa. She was seen as a visionary, but concealed a manipulative profile, ordered physical punishment of other nuns, had sexual relations with community members, and promoted distorted religious rituals. The most shocking, he poisoned those who threatened his leadership. During the interrogations, reports of internal worship, veneration of a deceased nun, considered holy without authorization from the church, and promises of divine visions in exchange for submission appeared. The Vatican has kept the scandal quiet for years, but the complete dossier remains archived and accessible in the records of the Holy See. The story of Sant'Ambrogio was not an isolated case, but one of the most documented. What was going on behind the walls of the convents rarely came to light, unless something went very wrong. 6. Possessed nuns in Loudun, between theater and torture. In 1632, in the small town of Loudun in France, nuns in the convent of the Ursulines began to exhibit strange behaviors, convulsions, screams, demonic visions, and public accusations of witchcraft. The case gained national resonance when they claimed to be possessed by demons sent by a local priest. Urbain Grandier. Grandier was known for his eloquence, intelligence, and enemies. He had already displeased ecclesiastical and civil authorities for his critical stance towards the church and his involvement with women. The nuns' accusations were the trigger for his conviction. Even without concrete evidence, he was tried, tortured, and burned alive in the public square. The most disturbing? Later documents suggest that the nuns could have been manipulated by political and religious figures who wanted to get rid of Grandier. Some admitted that they faked the symptoms, encouraged by exorcists and inquisitors in search of a moral spectacle. The case of Loudun shows how the figure of the nun, considered as a symbol of purity, could be instrumentalized by larger interests, and how the confinement and repression could explode into collective hysteria, with fatal consequences. 7. Pacts with the devil and obsession with sin. In periods of intense religious repression, obsession with sin reached extreme levels within the convents. Some reports go beyond moral transgression. They speak of pacts with the devil, secret rituals, and manifestations of forces that the church classified as infernal. While many of these stories have been distorted or used to justify severe punishments, some stand out for their level of detail and contradiction. In the 17th century, the convent of Louviers in France was the scene of one of the most controversial episodes involving demonic possessions. Nuns reported nocturnal visits of shadowy figures, levitations, unknown voices, and apocalyptic visions. The nun Jean de Angers accused priests of conducting black masses and of sealing satanic pacts with the blood of virgins. The response of the authorities was brutal: arrests, torture, and executions. But modern historians suggest another reading. Many of the nuns involved showed symptoms consistent with mental illness, trauma, or altered states of consciousness caused by extreme isolation and emotional repression. The devil, in these cases, could be less a supernatural entity and more a reflection of one's own inner anxieties, amplified by an environment where the fearsome was constant and absolute. These reports, even if they are overstated, help us to understand the psychological complexity of conventual life and how, in certain contexts, faith could be lived with an intensity bordering on despair. The image of nuns as untouchable figures, always virtuous, hides a much more complex reality. Behind the walls of the convents, there were human women with desires, fears, conflicts, and in many cases, revolts against their own condition. The cases we have seen here are not fanciful exceptions, but documented records of a system that, in the name of faith, also produced silence, suffering, and sometimes hard-to-believe scandals. If you found this content interesting, leave a comment with the case that most surprised you, or share other obscure stories you know about religious life.